The fragile ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas has come under more strain overnight, with Israel lashing out at the treatment of hostages released in Gaza. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is live in Jerusalem for us. Matthew, good morning. So what exactly happened?
Emma, good morning. We saw 8 hostages released by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad group at 2 different sites in Gaza today. They are 3 Israelis and 5 Thai nationals. The concern is over what happened at the southern site near Khan Yunis, an area where Hamas and Islamic Jihad have been operating, holding these hostages, and an area which was picked because seemingly it was nearby to the ruins of the home formerly inhabited by the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, who was killed by Israel a couple of months ago by Israel during the Gaza war. What happened there, and we had an ABC crew in that area today filming this occurrence, was the Islamic Jihad militants who were trying to run this operation seemingly lost control of the crowd. There were thousands and thousands of people crowding around the 2 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals who were released there. The first being 29-year-old Abel Yehud. You could see that they were surrounding her as she shuffled towards the Red Cross convoy vehicles that were going to be escorting her back to Israel. The fear on her face was quite visible. Followed up was the 80-year-old grandfather, Gadi Moses. He too had to fight through the crowds to get into those vehicles. And then the group of 5 nationals also had to run that gauntlet as well. It was a very different set of circumstances in northern Gaza, in Jabalia, where Agam Berger, the Israeli hostage, was brought out from the ruins of a building that had been bombed by Israel in the heart of the Jabalia refugee camp, paraded in front of the crowd there by Hamas before being put in those vehicles and driven to Israel as well. Very different circumstances, but it's the incident in the south near Khan Yunis which has really angered Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. He went so far this afternoon as to threaten, and indeed he did follow through on that threat, to delay the release of 110 Palestinian prisoners and detainees who would be freed in exchange for these Israeli hostages coming home. That did happen for a couple of hours, and he's followed up this threat and this promise that he made and the demand for international mediators to step in and seek assurances about the safety of future Israeli hostages to be released with this promise tonight.
During the release of our hostages today, we all saw shocking scenes. We made it clear to the mediators that we do not intend to accept any risk to our hostages. And I will add, whoever dares to harm our hostages will pay the price.
Matthew, what happened with the Palestinian prisoners and detainees?
So, Emma, they were eventually released, albeit a couple of hours late, and we also saw some clashes between Israeli security forces in the West Bank and the Palestinians who had gathered to greet those prisoners and detainees as they were brought out of the Ofer prison near Ramallah on buses and taken into the centre of that city there. We understand from local health authorities that around 14 people were injured in those clashes, but those prisoners were still released. The ones who were released into the West Bank included some who had been accused of involvement in things such as suicide bombings in the past. We had a former militant leader among them. But we do need to stress that others who were released as part of this group of 110 also include people like teenagers who'd been accused of throwing rocks at Israeli forces, who had never been charged but had been held regardless. And they've been released into places such as East Jerusalem, not inside the West Bank, but on this side of the security wall that is in place there. And some of them, including one family that we've spoken to today, are now seeking medical treatment for their son who has come out of prison in a pretty bad way. So those prisoner releases did indeed happen, albeit somewhat delayed, and it does go to show just how fragile this ceasefire and hostage deal is between Israel and Hamas. Both sides here were able to figure out what had happened today and come to some sort of resolution. It did get resolved in just a couple of hours or so, but as we head into the next phase of these talks and further negotiations beginning next week to try to achieve a lasting peace in Gaza, there'll be many people looking at what happened today and questioning whether or not that sort of attitude, that sort of temperature which surrounds this situation could harm those negotiations once they get started next week.